Welcome. My name is Amy Gingrich, and I'm Executive Director and Publisher at Menno Media, which is the publishing agency of Mennonite Church USA and Mennonite Church Canada. I'm honored to be here tonight as the host for this webinar. This webinar is brought to you tonight from Mennonite Church USA, and it focuses on a study resolution that will come before delegates in May at a special meeting of Mennonite Church USA. The resolution that we'll be talking about tonight is called For Justice in the U.S. Criminal Legal System. This is a study resolution, so while it will be discussed in May, there will not be a vote on it. Tonight's webinar is part of a series of webinars sponsored by the denomination in preparation for this special delegate session. You'll find in the chat tonight a link to the other webinars in this series, as well as the delegate resources that are being made available in advance on the Mennonite Church USA website. The recording of tonight's webinar will be posted later to this same site as well. I want to offer up a few housekeeping announcements as we start this evening. Tonight's webinar is using the Zoom webinar format, so all participants are muted. Our webinar is being broadcast tonight in Spanish, and if you need Spanish translation, just click on the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen for that service. You are welcome to ask questions tonight by using the Q&A feature, also found at the bottom of your screen. And finally, there have already been webinars in this series providing an overview of Mennonite Church USA decision-making, as well as on the role of resolutions in the denomination. So please keep that in mind as you pose questions, as tonight we're only going to have time to be taking questions around this specific resolution titled For Justice in the U.S. Criminal Legal System. We're going to start our webinar tonight in prayer, and I invite you to join me in this prayer. It's February, and that also means it's Black History Month. So tonight I'm going to be reading a prayer from Voices Together, number 992 from the African American Heritage Hymnal. Sovereign Majesty, we pray for the continued outpouring of your Spirit upon the Church, so that the fires of Pentecost may anoint us to take the gospel of Jesus Christ to all the world. Help us to release the anointing of the Holy Spirit, which dwells within us. Let us pour your blessing into the lives of others. Let us lift up the name of Jesus with power from on high. Amen. Tonight, we're going to introduce this webinar with some of the writers. We have with us this evening Eli Reimer and Isaac Yeagas, two of the writers of this resolution. Eli is one of the original writers, and then Isaac was a contributor to it. Eli is a senior at Goshen College, double majoring in peace, justice, and conflict studies, as well as Bible religion. And huge shout out there, as I'm also a Goshen College grad in the Bible religion department. We also have tonight Isaac Yeagas. He is pastor of Chapel Hill Mennonite Fellowship for over 15 years and has served as a member of the executive board of Mennonite Church USA and is currently president of the governing board of the North Carolina Council of Churches. In all these roles, leadership in biblical discernment has been fundamental for decision-making, especially as various members and constituencies seek a common vision. So welcome tonight, Eli and Isaac. We want to hear tonight from these writers about this resolution, its impact on the Mennonite Church, and how the proposed resolution will enable us as the people in the pew to join in God's activities in the world. Eli, we are going to turn to you to kick off these questions. If you could tonight help us by understanding why you wrote this resolution. If you could just provide a brief overview of the resolution as well during this time.
Yeah, thank you. This resolution started as a conversation between me and another Goshen College student, Zach Begley, at the last convention in 2019. we were talking about all of the problems that were coming up in very real ways with the U.S. criminal legal system. And Zach was especially frustrated that as a Black man, he wasn't seeing any support from the church in these issues that he was facing on a fairly regular basis. And at the end of that conversation, we kind of agreed that that was a resolution or some topic of conversation that MCUSA needed to bring up and needed to have. And after maybe a year, it quickly became apparent that nobody was writing that resolution. And so Zach said, you know what, I'll write this resolution. And I originally offered to help edit it. And it turns out once you edit it enough, you kind of become an author. So the two of us ended up co-authoring this resolution. It went through a number of phases. Right now its format is the primary resolution and then an appendix. The appendix goes over a lot more of the facts behind things and the reality that motivated us to write the resolution in the first place. The resolution itself has a summary statement essentially on what we're protesting in the criminal legal system and the basis that we see in Mennonite belief for this resolution and the basis we see in the Bible for this resolution. And then the second part of it is the resolution itself, which lists a total of 10 points that are meant as places to start to work together to figure out some sort of solution or way forward.
And Isaac, how did you come to be involved in this resolution?
Yeah, good to be here with all of you. Pretty excited about this resolution. Yeah, I was grateful to Zach and Eli for writing this thing, getting it going and having the vision for it and inviting us. They invited several churches to be involved in kind of like owning it. So yeah, they did most of the work by far. And several of us church leaders came in and decided to co-sponsor it and to get on board. And we're very excited about what it's turned into. Maybe I could just name two things to highlight why it was attractive to me and my congregation to become a co-sponsor. One is, Eli already mentioned that there's like a number of different points in the resolution itself. Just to highlight two that spoke to me and us one was the anti-death penalty position. That's been made very clear. This is something that just keeps on picking up steam as a position among Christians in the United States. Just this abhorrent practice of state-sponsored executions. Everyone from, the Catholic Church to a variety of evangelical groups have been anti-death penalty. And so that seemed very important for us to have a clear statement about that. And then the other was bail reform, which I think is, I can't remember which, maybe it's point 7 or 8 in the document, in the resolution. And yeah, that's something that me and my congregation have been a part of, just highlighting how horrible bail is, the cash bail system, which it's supposed to keep our community safe, but that's just not how it goes. What ends up happening is if you have enough money, then you can pay your way out of jail. But if you don't have access to wealth, then you're just stuck in there until your court date, which can be months on end, where you lose your job. I've seen people lose their children to social services because they can't parent while in jail, all because they can't afford their bail. So that's just two. There's a bunch of other wonderful things, but those are two particularly attractive, resonant parts of this resolution for us and our congregation.
Thank you. Eli, what impact do you think this resolution will have on our denomination, Mennonite Church USA?
Yeah, this is something that we spent a lot of time talking about as we were writing the resolution. At the very beginning, Zach and I had to kind of make sure it wasn't our manifesto, but something that actually we thought was something that was coming out of a concretely Christian and Mennonite identity, and that was highlighting practical ways to move forward as a denomination. And so we do name a lot of those practical points in our resolution. A lot of that has to do with how we would encourage additional education, additional resources within MCUSA to supporting that kind of education. Some of the points are also just for individuals or congregations. I think there's also something to be said for the fact that the primary impetus for this was that Zach, as a young Black man in the church, wasn't feeling supported by the church. And statements like this are how we show our support for those people within our church who are struggling with these very real issues.
Isaac, how about you? From where you sit as a pastor and someone who's participated at the executive board level, what impact do you think this resolution will have on our church?
Yeah. So as a Mennonite denomination, our Anabaptist tradition has always emphasized our peace witness. That's why I became a Mennonite. I've come from, well, all sorts of traditions, but that's a different story. But what attracted me to the Mennonite faith, our Mennonite tradition, Anabaptist tradition, was this centrality of peace. And I think this resolution will help us reclaim that as an important theological identity for our denomination. Keeps us centered, keeps us as a people, as a church, centered on the life of Jesus. For us to join in the ministry of Jesus in the world. So because this is about Jesus. Like, it's about Jesus Christ. This line, actually, as I was thinking about this, there's this, I just discovered it's in our hymnal, which is so great. It's a line I love to quote. It's number 928 in the back. It's from Hans Denk, which this just resonates with so much with what I think our denomination is about. So he says, no one can truly know Christ unless they follow after him in daily life. No one can truly know Christ unless they follow after him in daily life. And that life of Jesus, that is the center of our church, is nonviolent. Jesus embodies God's love for the world. That's our salvation from the violences of this world. And so I think this resolution helps us name the insidious violences that are part of our lives today. And we need to name them so that we can respond as a church, as a denomination, with peace, with a vision for peace, a life renewed with the peace of Christ. So that's why I think this is important, and will have this kind of effect on our denomination, to center us on Christ's peace today and what it means for our lives.
Let's push out, Isaac, you were already touching on this, how we, take that out from our church, but let's talk about that a little bit more. And I turn it back to you, Eli, about how will this resolution enable us to join God's activities in the larger world?
Yeah, so again, as one of the writers, I'm going to start just by reading from it, because we did spend a little while on these words and I'm kind of proud of them. So I'm going to just read the last two paragraphs of the summary section of the resolution. At the beginning of his ministry, Jesus reads from the prophet Isaiah, saying, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Then Jesus declares, "Today the scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." As Christians, we are called to look to Jesus and the prophetic tradition of the Bible for our vision of justice. We, like every generation of the church before us, are called to do our part, empowered by the Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead, to advance God's all-encompassing shalom on earth as it is in heaven. When we were writing this resolution, we very much saw its roots in the Bible and in a biblical vision of justice, and a vision of justice that extends from the Old Testament prophets into the life and words and ministry of Jesus, and then out into the church and how the church has witnessed to Jesus Christ in the past and today. I think that this resolution for me is really taking that core value of, I would say, pacifism, but even more core, just loving our fellow human being who was also created by God and called good. And how do we act out that truth? And part of acting out that truth is facing realities like the realities of the criminal legal system and working to change them and working to create systems that don't hurt people but heal them, right? I feel like that's a very basic call as Christians, that's very rooted in the Bible and in the life and teachings of Jesus.
Thank you so much for that. That last sentence there of the summary is what I underlined and starred in my version as well. And I think really encapsulates what this, as you said, what this resolution is about. Isaac, what would you add to that about how this resolution enables us to join in God's activities in the world?
Yeah, I really liked, Eli, what you just shared there, and that call to, that the way this resolution is a way for us to act out the truth that God offers us, the truth of the gospel. And yeah, I mean, that truth, at least that I see as central for what this resolution does in terms of linking us to God's activity, is the truth of the life and witness of Jesus at the heart of our faith. That Jesus is vital for us. His ministry is central to how we understand God's activity in the world. Jesus always reminds the disciples that they need to be paying attention to be alert, to be awake, to discern the signs of the times. To always be in discernment about what the calling of discipleship means here and now. And I think in our Mennonite tradition, Eli already touched on this in terms of our peace witness, pacifism, caring about our neighbors. We've used different words or phrases to help us understand different aspects of our life with Christ. We've talked over the past century as a tradition about our peace witness as a posture of non-resistance, which is kind of an older language. Some people still use that, or non-violence or non-coercion, or more recently, something like non-violent resistance. The language that I'd like to use is as anti-violence. I think maybe, Eli, this gets at some of what you're talking about too, that like we're against violence, not just that our commitment to peace is just about ourselves and worried what we're going to do, and that we won't repay evil for evil or violence for violence. We won't live by the sword and die by the sword. But instead, this posture of Christian anti-violence is all about our love for our neighbors, that we won't let violence threaten their lives, that they won't be taken from us. So we're against violence in all forms because we are for our neighbors. So yeah, I would consider this resolution as spelling out one more aspect of this posture of our peace witness, of Christian anti-violence, of what it means to take our historic peace witness seriously in our world today, in our carceral society.
Thank you, Isaac, for that challenge and those words on anti-violence. We're going to make a little pivot tonight and hear now from 4 conference ministers who are with us as panelists. But before we do, I just want to remind you that during the webinar, as you have questions about this proposed study resolution, you may pose those questions in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will come back to Eli and Isaac after we hear from our 4 conference ministers with us tonight. And Eli and Isaac will be addressing those questions. So again, please do make use of that Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Also with us tonight are 4 conference ministers as panelists. We have Dick Barrett here, a conference minister from Ohio Conference. And prior to being called to pastoral ministry, he 20 years ago, he served in law enforcement with the New York State Police for almost 22 years. He has a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in criminal justice, as well as a master's degree in pastoral ministry. We have with us tonight Stanley Green, who is Executive Conference Minister of Pacific Southwest Mennonite Conference. We have the Reverend Amy Zimbelman, and she is the Conference Minister of Mountain States Mennonite Conference. Amy and her husband Matt live in Colorado Springs with their 2 young sons. And we have Brooke Musselman with us, and Brooke serves as Conference Coordinator for Atlantic Coast Conference. And Brooke and his wife Laura and their 2 small children live outside of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And Brooke wrote in his bio to please pray for him, as he's been unable to stop humming songs from Encanto for over a month. And I sent Brooke a note earlier and said, the same thing is happening in my house. So we've been humming those songs here too. So we're so happy to have you here tonight, Dick and Brooke, Amy and Stanley, and to hear from you. So as conference ministers, these panelists also received some questions ahead of time about this study resolution and how they are interpreting it and understanding it in their conference and congregational contexts. So we're going to start tonight with Stanley with the question, how does this study resolution enable us to join God's activity in the world? And after we hear from Stanley, the other panelists are welcome to join in as well.
Hi, everyone. Good to be with you this evening. I'm really thrilled for the resolution that has been shared with us and further clarified this evening by Eli and Isaac. I believe the resolution will have the effect of expanding for our congregations the register of what we think makes for righteousness or faithful discipleship. I read recently that Anthony Dean, who is the canon at the Cathedral of Worcester in England, reflecting on the Lord's Prayer and on the particular verses that say, forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. He notes that Jesus chose the word ophelemata rather than the traditional hamartia, which we're all familiar with. Wes observes that when Jesus uses this text, he is talking about ophelemata is debts, and it's not the deliver us from willful injury or harm to others that Jesus references. Rather, he says the choice that Jesus makes of debts is about a failure to use opportunities that we have for good. And he links it to the sheep and the goats parable that Jesus told in Matthew 25, where Jesus grounds condemnation for wrongdoing, where condemnation is not for wrongdoing in the ordinary sense of stealing or hurting our neighbors, but it is a failure to do right. It's missing the opportunity for showing love and compassion. compassion. And I think the impact of this, or my prayers, the impact of this resolution is that will help us across the church see how we're called to something more than just not lying, not stealing, not murdering, but also to show compassion and love and justice to those who are hurting. I would say too that the incarceration system in our country is grossly unfair. In a society that's built on pervasive structural inequities, it would be naive to think otherwise. In a society where we have a history of normalized political wrongdoing, where the systems that are in place were built on violations of human rights of others. In fact, in my more cynical or sober moments, when I'm not intoxicated by hope and optimism and a desire to believe the best about people's motivation, I come to the place where I think that policing and incarceration systems in our country were put in place to control, and not only control, but to disadvantage and damage Black and other persons of color. How else can we explain walking while Black, or driving while Black, or doing anything while Black, which becomes a pretext for the police to take innocent people into their control and spark a chargeable offense or even death. So my sense is that this resolution will open for us the opportunity to position ourselves, as Jesus did in that Luke 4 reading that Eli shared with us, to position ourselves in solidarity with the oppressed, with those who have been marginalized by our society.
I can go next. So thank you, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to share this evening. So one of the pastors in our conference here in Mountain States has a tattoo on her arm based on Hebrews 13:3, which says, "Remember those who are in prison as though you were in prison with them, those who are being tortured as though you yourselves were being tortured." So this resolution is naming the injustices in the criminal legal system. The God that we serve is a just God, right? And an empathetic God who invites us towards empathy with those who are suffering. What if we lived as though we were chained to folks in for-profit prisons, right? Like, what if you woke up tomorrow and functioned as though that was your reality? Or what if we really imagined what it's like to lose our job and our house just because we couldn't come up with a few $100 for bail? Or what if one of our loved ones was on death row in part because of their skin color? Would that maybe add a little bit of urgency, right, to address some of these injustices that are being named in this resolution? God tells us very clearly where God is. God is already with folks experiencing the US criminal legal system. And so God is with us when we're in solidarity with those who suffer. As Eli and Isaac have shared, this is one way that we follow in the footsteps of Jesus. This solidarity is how we live as his peacemaking disciples who are always anti-violence. I like that. I'm going to keep using that. It's not tangential to the gospel, right? It's absolutely central for us to follow Jesus in this way and for us to be in solidarity with folks in this system.
I really like, and will echo what others have said about this idea of um, anti-violence, but I think even more the idea of shalom appeals to me, where it's all about what we're for. We're for wholeness. We're for completeness of God's people. That's our call as Christ followers. So I really love that this resolution kind of gives us a guide to proactively live into that vision of shalom. It's this invitation into that vision to bring wholeness into our world, into our communities, where there's a whole lot of brokenness right now. And it also, I liked how the resolution points to the opportunity that we have as Christ followers with this vision, who also happen to be US citizens with voting rights, who also happen to be, in many cases, people of privilege, either because of our skin color, our relative wealth, for a variety of reasons. And it kind of calls us to make use of some of those gifts, and kind of in our unique ways, living into that vision. I also noted there's a whole lot of different options there on page 2, the list of 10 things. Some of those might appeal to some of us in different ways, but I think, there's something there for all of us to, a way for all of us to contribute to that vision.
I too want to thank you for having the opportunity this evening to be here and to be a part of this panel and to discuss this resolution. I think I'm kind of in a unique place because I spent the first half of my life working with police and the criminal justice system and studying it, and then coming to the Mennonite Church. And two of the things that attracted me most to the Mennonite Church was the peace position, though I had a hard time getting to it, but recognizing that to be a disciple of Jesus, that's where we need to be. But the other part for me was the two kingdom theology, that there's this kingdom of this world and there's the kingdom of God. And somehow we live in that tension. And so I too believe that all of us are created in God's image, but I also have witnessed and recognized, and even in myself, that we're also capable of great evil. And so sometimes I wonder if maybe we've gone from one extreme of not even speaking and trying to speak into the world to learning that we've gotten to the place of we should at least speak into the world, but that I think sometimes our expectations of what we expect of the kingdom of this world. But the question is, how does this resolution enable us to join God's activity in the world? Well, to me, just the fact that more and more people are becoming aware of and better educated in the injustices that are present in the US criminal justice system, whether it be individual or systemic racism, excessive violence and brutality, and disproportionate rates of arrest, incarceration, and the use of the death penalty is evidence of God already working in our world. But I also want to say that after working in the system for a long time, that there's a lot of good people, good Christian people that are working in the system already with good motives and trying to make the best of an imperfect system. But I also know that I don't know it personally, but I've heard it from a lot of people of color, and even over the past couple of years with the pandemic, their negative experience of the church, and these are people within the church and within many of our Mennonite churches, their experience hasn't been so much the effect of the pandemic on them, but many of them have expressed the feeling that they have not been supported by the church. So echoing Zachary's feeling of they've not felt supported by the church, and including, if not even more so, from their Mennonite brothers and sisters. So I think that's the reality that exists in our church today.
Vic, we'll keep the spotlight on you and talk a little bit about the implications of this resolution for your conference and or your congregation.
Well, I think it's a good question because I don't know if we spend enough time discerning both the short-term and long-term implications of the resolutions that we pass. I do like that this is a study resolution. And the reason I do, it's kind of even like Eli's comment of she didn't originally design it, but as she worked with it, then she actually owns it. And I think we have so many people from across our conference in different places without firsthand experience of what the criminal justice system is like, that it takes time to, and so I think just the idea that's being brought as a study resolution, hopefully more people can take ownership in it. So it's just not a group telling us what we should do, that we all need to own this. I think it provides educational opportunities for those in our conference and in the churches. I also like the steps, the resolution, the 10 steps that people could do it. It offers concrete steps from some in our people, in our congregations and churches could do.
Any other conference minister want to answer that one about the implications for this resolution in your conference or congregation?
In Atlantic Coast Conference, when there's been recent study resolutions, I'm thinking about the one on Israel-Palestine a couple of years ago. There's nothing binding to it, but we see that as kind of a mandate from delegates that this is what's important to the denomination. So we're going to give some time and energy to it. So for past resolutions, what we've done is spend the better part of an annual assembly gathering with a speaker or in conversation, depending on what resources are available. So together, corporately, spending time and just kind of signifying that this is important, this is worth our time. And then in other ways, inviting congregations to and individuals to kind of work at this in different ways in their contexts.
I think I would just add to that along with the opportunity to create greater awareness of some of the systemic injustices that people are affected by, I think it can be the occasion for expanding our missional engagements. In the past, some congregations have had a limited inventory of things that were deemed missionally appropriate. And I think this would be one of those instances where we can sense the call that Jesus issued and at the beginning of his ministry, and then at the end when he says, I was in prison and you did not visit me, I think could become the occasion for churches and the conference to support churches that want to become more directly involved in working for justice and with those who are incarcerated.
Yeah, I would say for our conference, Mountain States, I think this resolution will empower us in some of the work that we're already up to. And then the hope is that it would encourage even more participation. At the end of the resolution, it mentions immigration, and this is kind of our conference's specialty. So about half of our congregations are intimately involved in working with immigrants and asylees. And so we have experience with ICE detention. We've helped start and partner closely with multiple immigration nonprofits. And then in addition to that, we have a church that set up a fund to pay for cash bail, and a church that got the ACLU involved in a police brutality situation recently. Raw Tools, as you may know, is also in our conference. So they do a lot of restorative and transformative justice work. They have a brand new curriculum that asks questions like, if we had active violence in our church, when would we call the police, right? So we have a lot of this already happening. I am a conference minister, so I get to brag about my conference. So then, I mean, the hope is that this would give institutional backing and, you know, that extra gold star for folks already involved. And then hopefully those who are on the fence, not currently involved, hopefully they would want to learn more, invest differently, get to know someone on the inside, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I think that institutional backing cannot be, you can't put enough importance on that.
Thank you all for your answers. Let's keep it here with you, Amy, and have you start with the next question as well. What has been informative as you process the content of this resolution?
Yeah, so relationships was definitely the first thing that came to mind for me personally. So before becoming conference minister, I spent about a decade of my life working professionally with refugees, immigrants, asylum seekers. And I remember one client that I had from Cuba, a young man, was seeking asylum, and he had done nothing that the US considers illegal. And so our country went ahead and just put him in prison, in ICE detention for almost a year. So he'd done nothing wrong, simply seeking safety. There was no trial for him. And he just lost a year of his life to the trauma of prison. In my experience, the more you spend time with folks and hear the stories, the more you're just appalled. And so relationships are number one for processing the content of this resolution. So I'm really glad that that's part of the resolution is, hey, we should be seeking out relationships as a way to learn more about this. In addition to that, I would recommend a few resources, and these are ones that have come out of our conference. So one is the Fear Not curriculum from Raw Tools that I mentioned. Another is this lovely book that I happen to have right on hand here called The House That Love Built. And it's by Sarah Jackson, and it's from an organization called Casa de Paz that's based in our conference and that a lot of folks in our churches help support. And it's right outside the ICE detention center, and they offer hospitality when folks are released. And then one more shameless plug. I know, I'm sorry about this, but I have to do this. For our conference's annual Faith and Life Forum, you all are invited. The title of it is The Myth of the Perfect Victim, a biblical and pop culture case for taking survivors seriously. And so one of our two speakers at this, Will Larry, is a mental health therapist, and he's going to analyze hip hop music to help us understand trauma responses, especially in the Black community. And then the other speaker is Susanna Larry, so you can't go wrong with that. And it's virtual, so you all can come. You're invited March 26th. Hopefully they'll put a link up. So yes, don't blame me. It's my job to do these shameless plugs. But at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, the more that you learn, the more people that you know who are wrapped up in these systems, the more it becomes just obvious, just painfully obvious that our moral and Anabaptist obligation is to act as peacemakers and to alleviate suffering. And so I think it's tempting to kind of argue about the details of a document like this for a long time, but I think it's just, we need to move to protect marginalized people, right? We need to move to be public peacemakers in this world. So that's my vote.
I would echo Amy's thoughts about relationships, that you have to have the personal relationships with people that have experienced the system to really have to recognize, and that's not to say that the system doesn't work for some people, but I think you need to have the experience with people that are being oppressed or discriminated by the system too. I find the resolution informative. Well, I think it's exciting that it's coming from some young adults in our church and from Goshen College. I just think that speaks a lot. And it's an informative of someone who had lots of education in the criminal justice system, but that was 20 years ago, and recognizing how much has changed in 20 years, or maybe it's just more, I'm not sure if that much has changed, but more of the truth has come about. And so, yeah, I find it to be informative.
One thing that struck me as I was reading this resolution was how so many of these structural problems overlap. The criminal justice, the need for reform, immigration, which Amy mentioned, anti-racism, probably climate change, like all these things, there's aspects of it that lean on each other. So I think it's very easy for me to get overwhelmed by that. I don't know if anybody else is there. There's so many things. Where do I focus? But yeah, just seeing how they're all tied together in some ways gives me a little bit of hope, I think, if I think about it long enough. I have just this hope that if I start kind of pulling this little thread of this blanket of injustice, maybe, you know, eventually it gets unwound. I can do my little thing. So I think I'm finding hope in that. I got to keep working on that though.
Stanley, you're muted. There you go.
I think I will agree with Brooke. What was amazing to me is to see how many ways these systems intersect to ensure the marginalization or oppression of certain segments of society. I also want to just add, standing in line behind Amy, that the Pacific Southwest Mennonite Conference hosts and partners with dismantling the doctrine of discovery. And we see it as a call to ensure that those convictions or beliefs that sustain the oppression that many people have experienced need to be dismantled. And then we also have a ministry in Tucson to people who have come across the border undocumented and are put in prison. So several ways the conference has been working in the Tucson area to minister to those who are incarcerated.
Let's talk next about opportunities for implementation. There is this great list of 10 ideas here on page 2 of the resolution. Lots of opportunities there. Brooke, we'll start tonight with you. What opportunities do you see?
Yeah, I really appreciate this list of 10 things. 10. I think in the resolution it says this is not exhaustive or something to that extent. But so these are a really great starting point, especially thinking about how we have these great MCUSA and related agencies that do specialize in some of this type work. Thinking about MCC's advocacy work, how on their website you can very easily find and communicate with your representatives. Everence likely already has investment funds that helps you divest from private prisons. Mano Media and its curriculum, which I'm sure already exists on this topic. And the way MCUSA often pulls a lot of these resources together, like through the Learn, Pray, Join campaigns, which have been really great. Please keep those up. So yeah, our agencies are a great place to start and provide some really great resources. It just takes a little bit of commitment on our part sometimes to really dig into that. But then other points on that list of 10, really do take some creative work in our communities, like the supporting families of those who've been incarcerated, and learning from former prisoners who've been harmed. Learning about injustices in our own assumptions, that takes personal hard work. So some of this is really pretty tough personal work that I think we all just need to do. There's also a multitude of great speakers for Sunday mornings or conference gatherings. I'd love to see a list. I don't know if such a thing exists or if we could put one together, but there's some really great resources. Yeah, I think I mentioned before it, but if not, yeah, I really appreciate how there's just a variety of ways we can make contribution towards criminal justice reform. Yeah, there's just a variety of things. So if something appeals to me, might not appeal to somebody else, but you know, it's covered. I really appreciate that about this list.
I'm not sure if Brooke mentioned this already, but it seems to me that we could be assisted in the implementation if MCUSA, the denomination, would share stories of what different parts of the church are doing in this regard. I think as we learn how some initiatives are working, we might be inspired in our congregations to also emulate some of that work. So I would hope that we can find a way to share the stories of those who are already doing this work.
I think the 10 concrete steps in the resolution itself are a great starting point of how we can implement the resolution. And you can't do them all, but can we at least, and depending on where your church is or who you might be connected to, are there just some of one or two of them that you might be able to work on? It starts with number one, about learning about the injustices. That's essential, but then you need to go out and do something with it to engage people that are in the system or working with the system or speaking into the system. I'm just a little cautious about like ending cash bail. I think there definitely has to be bail reform. My question with it is, what's the alternative? What's the alternative to people appearing back into court or not committing further crimes, and mandating reduction in police violence? To me, that's not something you can mandate. I hopefully we can reduce it by speaking into the system and hopefully changing people's hearts but I think the 10 concrete steps are a great start to how we can implement it in our conference and congregations.
Amy, we're going to take our last question in this set to you. What might help prepare this study resolution for a delegate vote?
Yeah, so overall, I think this is a thoughtful, well-researched resolution, and I hope we can all get behind it. I would love to see it expanded, obviously more on immigration, since that's very close to my heart and to our conference's heart. School to prison pipeline, maybe a companion document that goes along with it that has real stories to kind of help people to envision what would it look like if a church paid cash bail for someone. How does that help change that person's life? So I'd love to see that. But at the end of the day, I think the real work is not going to be preparing the resolution. It's going to be preparing our communities for it as best we can during this study time. So let me just give you a little example. My 4-year-old saw a Paw Patrol toy at the store the other day and announced to all of the Target shoppers, Mommy, we can't get that toy because you don't like police officers. And he announces this in Colorado Springs, which is a very pro-military and police town. And so I explained to him out loud in front of the other customers my very nuanced perspective on policing. But his takeaway was still that I just don't like the police, right? I think it's going to be tempting for many people in our congregations to look at this resolution and to just say, MCUSA doesn't like the police, right? But we can't get stuck thinking in those dichotomized terms like my son, right? It's because we care about the police and the prison worker and the bounty hunter and the cash bail person. It's because we care about these folks that we don't want them wrapped up in an unjust and overly violent system. Injustice hurts everyone, right? Including them. And so I think these sorts of nuances are going to be vital to communicate to our church communities if we do want this thing to pass. And so, in short, I hope that our denomination can do that hard work and then can have the courage to adopt a meaningful statement like this one on such an important topic. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much, conference ministers, for joining us tonight for this conversation and for sharing your perspectives about how you can talk about this resolution, how you can prepare congregations in your conferences ahead of this delegate session coming up in May. Just a quick reminder that our webinar is being recorded and it will be posted later on the special delegate section of the Mennonite Church USA website. And it's also part of this series of webinars that Mennonite Church USA is sponsoring right now to help prepare congregations for this special delegate session happening in May in Kansas City. There have already been webinars, as I said earlier, in this series providing an overview of the Mennonite Church USA decision-making structure, as well as a webinar on the role of resolutions in our denomination. So tonight, we're only going to be taking questions specifically about this resolution, the For Justice in the U.S. criminal legal system. And we'll turn it back to Eli and Isaac to be answering your questions about the resolution. You can use that chat query at the bottom of the page to post some questions. I'm going to start off tonight with some questions that people asked in the registration form for tonight's webinar. The first one, is there a way to lift up the values and principles of restorative justice more explicitly? Also, why no mention here of victim needs?
Well, I can start us off, if only because I just finished my internship with the Center for Community Justice last semester. So I do know quite a bit about restorative justice at this point. I mean that a little bit ironically because it was only a semester. Restorative justice, for those who don't know it, or maybe aren't super familiar with the term, is a framework for addressing conflict. And beyond that, its definition is a little bit disputed amongst practitioners. Some see it as very much a philosophy, like a way of viewing conflict. Some people see it as a set of very practical ways of addressing conflict, and then everywhere in between. We do mention restorative justice in our last point, seeking out alternatives to the current legal system through restorative justice, and creating new systems of justice. We don't spend more time on it for a number of reasons. First, we were told that we needed to cut quite a bit of this resolution. What you are seeing is a very, very, very cut down version of what we originally wrote, because apparently resolutions are not research papers. All this to say, restorative justice was very much on our minds when we were talking about this. But one of the things we were very conscious of is that we didn't want to limit the resolution in its possibilities. We wanted to be able to name restorative justice as a possibility while also saying that this is not the only alternative to the current legal system, that there are other ways that we can work for justice that don't reflect the current legal system that are also not restorative justice. And so it really was a balancing act. I would say the same thing about addressing victim needs, that this has been a very cut down document, and that not every single issue with the criminal legal system could be addressed in it. I think that the criminal legal system doesn't do a very good job of addressing victim needs in the way that it is set up right now. That was something that was very clear to me during my internship when I worked with victims who had absolutely no idea what was going on with their case, who felt ignored by the legal system, who felt betrayed by the legal system. And that is a legitimate problem within the criminal legal system. It's not something that we had the space to address here, but it is something that we feel like if a congregation or even an individual feels called to do, that's something that they should feel free to address. And that's why we point out that these are only starting points, right? There are a whole lot of problems that can't be listed in such a short document, and we didn't want to limit any of what people felt called to do.
I would just add, in terms of how we think about victims and consulting victims, one thing that I learned, this was a long time ago, before I was a pastor, I worked as a counselor at a home for adjudicated youth who were convicted of sex crimes. And part of what I had to do for my job was to read all their files. And all of those offenders were also victims at some point in their life. So it's also the case in prisons that people who are put there as offenders are typically at some point victims of some kind of violent crime. So this language of victim and offender gets messy, actually, once you start to get to know people who are incarcerated. And it's also the case that I would consider incarceration and our systems of punishment as a kind of victimizing mechanism, that people who are put in those situations have now become victims. This is all the more clear right now in the midst of this pandemic, where COVID is running rampant in prisons, in jails, and the solution is that this is the case here in prisons in North Carolina and in our local county jail. The solution is to put everyone in solitary confinement. They call it segregation, which is just isolated units, which is another form of punishment. So I think we need to be, to realize that this language of victim and offender is part of these cycles of violence, and it's very hard to separate those two identities.
Our next question also comes from the registration form. Someone writes, I understand that there are social injustices that this resolution addresses. My question is this: will you please help me understand and thus explain the Mennonite responsibility and opportunity to be involved when I receive comments such as, Jesus didn't try to change the Roman government. Why should the church get involved in this discussion?
Isaac, I don't technically have a degree yet in Bible things, so I think you should take this one.
Okay, got my Bible here. Maybe this will help me figure. Yeah, I mean, that is a good question. I guess I would say maybe one place to start in the resolution itself. Eli and Zach highlight Luke 4, where kind of this is what Jesus says at the beginning of his ministry, what he's about. He says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. And one of those things that Jesus says, the Spirit does is to release prisoners, to proclaim release to captives, to prisoners. That is an offense to the Roman Empire. It's the Roman Empire that imprisons people. It's not Jesus's people who imprison people. It's the Roman Empire who imprisons people. So that is affecting change in a systemic structure. If you continue on in Luke's gospel, you can see that the same Spirit at work that Jesus announces in Luke 4 is at work in the ministry of the apostles in Acts. So you have, for example, Paul and Silas. They get arrested, thrown in prison. And what does the Spirit do? The Spirit shakes the foundations of the prison with an earthquake so violent that it releases not just Paul and Silas from their prison cells, but all the prisoners. There's no like Spirit discerning, oh, which one's really guilty or which one deserves to be here. No, everyone is let out. The Spirit lets everybody out. And it says that the guard there is so, he knows that like the Roman Empire is going to come after him now, right? Because he just failed at his job to keep all these people in prison. And he has a sword, then he's going to, kill himself. And Paul and Silas are concerned about this person's life, the guard's life, who has been keeping them in prison. And so they say, no, you know what, we won't leave. I mean, all the other people leave, but Paul and Silas say, we won't leave if that'll help your situation. Don't do what you're about to do. Those are just some things that come to my mind immediately about how Jesus and especially the Holy Spirit is at work disrupting the mechanisms of the Roman Empire. You don't have a Roman Empire without prisons, and that kind of sounds like our own society. I mean, you don't have the US Empire without prisons either.
Let's stay right with the Bible here for the next question as well. This one comes tonight from someone watching the webinar live, and the person asks, could you talk about how this resolution and the actions it calls Mennonite Church USA to engage in fit into the Great Commission, go ye into all the world, as found in Matthew 28, 18-20. It's good you have your Bible with you, Isaac.
I can just start off really quickly and say that in my life, I think the greatest effect that Christians have had on people my age is through their actions and not their words. That what convinces especially young people, but I really think everyone, about Christianity and about Jesus is through what we're doing in the world to act out Jesus's vision. It's not the preaching in a church that does it, it's the going out and helping. And so if there's any connection to the call to make disciples of all nations, it's that we need to be living out our faith in our everyday lives.
Yeah, and I would just maybe only follow up with, I'm just looking at the passage now. And I guess what's striking to me is, yes, it says, Jesus says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them, etc. And then says, and teaching them to obey everything that I have commanded you. And so I think it's important to say that what it means to be a disciple and to be commissioned is also to take the life and ministry and teachings of Jesus seriously. You go out and do all the things I've commanded you. And part of that, as already been mentioned, I can't remember who mentioned it, but the passage where Jesus talks about visiting people. Amy, I think you mentioned it. Visiting people, Amy Zimbelman, sorry. Visiting people who are in prison. And that's in Matthew's gospel. So I would say that the Great Commission is kind of a summary of everything that's gone on before in Jesus's life and teachings. and saying, remember everything. And at least for me, for my life, it's the last verse, the last part of that verse that is sticking with me right now, where he said, concludes the end of Matthew's gospel. And remember, I am with you always to the end of the age. I think that's just a good word of comfort and strength, because this is hard work. This requires a lot of us. When Jesus tells us to obey all of his commands, we can't do that on our own. It's only by the grace of God and the presence of Christ through the Spirit. I'm grateful for that promise at the end of Matthew that Jesus is with us as we do this work.
The next two questions are related, and they come tonight from Rosie and Robin, posing them on the live chat. They've asked, have judges, police officers, lawyers, etc., seen this resolution and given comments? So one has asked that. And the other has asked, has a group of people who have chosen to live out their peace witness as police officers, lawyers, or in roles where people manage/work with law enforcement had an opportunity to review and provide input on the resolution? If not, would you be open to do this as part of the ongoing study process, or are there reasons you would prefer not to, or perhaps also a process reason?
This is a question that has come up, I think, every single time we have presented on this resolution. So there are a lot of different routes I can take with this answer. I would say the first answer is that, yes, we consulted with a number of people who are involved in all different parts of the criminal legal system. We sent this resolution out to a number of people within the Mennonite Church who have connections to that system that we knew of. We are also, again, 2 college students. So at that point in the process, our connections were kind of limited. At this point in the process, this resolution has been made public to the entirety of MCUSA. It's also 100% out of our hands. I love this resolution. I can't edit it anymore. Totally out of my hands. But what that means is that police officers and lawyers and all sorts of other people who are involved in the criminal legal system are currently being given the chance to review it and tell us what they think. And that's what we're hoping to give feedback to. But I think the more important point that I always feel when I hear this question is that nobody has ever asked us if we consulted with people who are in prisons or who have been arrested or those people who have suffered at the hands of the criminal justice system. That's not a worry that anybody has. Nobody seems worried that those people might be misrepresented. And that's personally my biggest worry. As somebody who has never been incarcerated or arrested, I'm afraid that I'm misrepresenting their experiences. And I want to continue to highlight those voices in this resolution because those are the people who are being impacted the most by the injustices that are happening right now.
Yeah, Eli, what you said resonates with me a lot. I think the only thing that I would add is maybe to highlight something that Dick, that you shared earlier, was that, I mean, there are people who are in the criminal legal system, who are involved in all these processes, and they realize that it's not great either. It's not like there's 2 camps here, and we're on the side that says, everything needs to be changed, while people who are operating the system are saying, no, everything's great. That's not how it is. I'm on a city, county, Board of Education task force here I was appointed to this task force to try to come up with ways to create a safer environment, because people realize that, police show up too late. I mean, that's just the nature of policing, for example. They come after the harm has already been done, and we want a society where harms are not done. So everyone wants that. We have currently in our city police department, there's 97 vacancies. 97 vacancies. They cannot hire. They cannot hire people. So what we're doing is we're saying, you know what? Let's try to come up with unarmed crisis responders, because it's the case that you don't need an armed police officer showing up to every 911 call. They don't want to show up to every 911 call. All that to say that this resolution is not something, when you get into what's going on the ground in cities, in counties, people are trying desperately to fix the system because it is so bad for everybody. So I would hope that this resolution would inspire us to be involved in some of that work, to get on city county task force, to try to figure out ways to make unarmed respondents, crisis response, something that can happen in your area. So I find this resolution as inspiring to get in touch with all those people that the person who asked the question just named, because I bet you that they would be interested in conversation about how we can be involved in making our society safer.
Thank you. Next, we're going to take another question that came in live tonight. Brooke mentioned that a resolution is non-binding, but Atlantic Coast would be choosing to engage. Say more. Is the resolution telling people what to do or just bringing attention to the topic?
If I could make a resolution where we approved it and it told every single person in MCUSA what to do, that would be wonderful. I cannot write that resolution, and I don't think MCUSA can approve it. We wrote this very much so that MCUSA has a statement on this, which, like I said, is at its core something that's very impactful to people who feel unheard and unsupported by the church right now. But also as a starting place. We wanted this to be a place that started conversations, that started actions. We wanted this list at the end to be a list for people who say, well, what can I do? That list personally was kind of hard for me to come up with, because I like the idea of taking big, grand, sweeping gestures and fixing everything at once, and there being one person who solves everything, and that's not the reality. And not everybody can do all 10 of those steps, and we don't really expect people to. It's a study resolution. There are other people who could explain better what a study resolution means. But part of that is just continuing to be engaged in this topic, and that's what we really want.
It's also the case that these resolutions are a way for us as delegates, as members of our churches, to direct our staff, the staff of Mennonite Church USA, to say that these are priorities for us. Help us figure out how to be involved in this kind of work. So if the delegates, and I hope you all do, pass this resolution, that sends a signal to our executive director, Glenn Guyton, for him to figure out how he can enable his staff to work on some of these issues and provide us resources in our congregations, et cetera. Sometimes that work gets filtered down into our congregations, our conferences, and kind of out into our various agencies as well. So in a lot of ways, this is a way for our congregations, our delegates, you and I, to help indicate which priorities we care about, and to help our denomination center itself on those priorities.
And our final question relates to this one as well. The person asks, why is this only a study resolution? I would like to see our church take a stance on this important topic.
I don't think we're the right people to answer that. We weren't the ones who chose to make it a study resolution. I don't know, Isaac, do you have a better answer for that?
No, yeah, you're exactly right. That was a decision made by the executive board So we would defer to the moderator on that question.
Great. And Camille has posted there in the chat so many fabulous links tonight. So copy that chat from tonight's webinar. So you've got all those links to the many resources that our presenters and panelists have named tonight, to all the news releases about this resolution, to the links to past webinars in this series. Just a lot of great information. Again, I'm Amy Gingrich with Menno Media, and I was asked to host this webinar tonight for Mennonite Church USA. So on behalf of Mennonite Church USA, I want to say thank you so much, Eli and Isaac especially, for coming on tonight and taking all these questions and sharing about your passion for this resolution. I thank you as well to Dick and Amy and Stanley and Brooke coming on and sharing about the implications and the opportunities of this resolution for congregational life. Thank you all for joining us, and watch for the recording later that'll be posted online. And for all of the news and events for Mennonite Church USA, please sign up for Peacemail, Mennonite Church USA's weekly e-newsletter. And the link for that is also in the chat. Thank you, everyone. Take care and have a good night.